Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukutali.
Hello there and a very good morning. It's the 19th of September 2016. It's a brand new day, a brand new week. The 71st session of the United Nations General Assembly will commence later today. And of course, joining us this morning in our studios is the Executive Director of Transparency International, Asoka Obesekara. Let's say good morning to him. A very good morning to you, Asoka.
Good morning to you, sir.
And thank you very much for joining us.
With pleasure, as always.
Asoka, Transparency International Sri Lanka has done a lot of work with regard to several issues such as the RTI, which was in debate, in contention over the past few months. Successfully it was implemented, and we're still in that teething process where information officers are being appointed. The government has asked for 6 months, I believe, to sort of implement it properly. What do you think of this teething process? Is it happening successfully, or do you think that more needs to be done?
Well, I think the point, and I'll pick on the words that you use there as well, because I think the word implement is the key word. What we saw in just very recently is the fact in early August, the fact that we have been able to pass the bill, so we have an RTI Act, is a significant step. But the devil is in the detail, and now we, as you touched on, need to appoint information officers and other things. The key thing is, underlying the RTI Act is the fact that citizens now, it's recognized, the social contract between the state and the citizen, and the fact that citizens have the right to request information, that is there and it's enshrined. The issue is that implementation is really the elephant in the room. Because we're going to need something like 4,000 information officers and 4,000 designated officers. So 8,000 appointments here. That's not 8,000 new jobs. Many people who are currently in public authorities will be assigned. But it's not, there will be many teething issues. For anyone who's watching and wants to know how they can use the Right to Information Act, I mean, from February onwards, the Right to Information Act, February 2017 onwards, the Right to Information Act goes online. But there's a chance that very few public authorities would have been gazetted by that time. So really, everything comes online, and the ultimate deadline is August of next year. So we'll have to see how it rolls out. At the moment, on the state side, there doesn't seem to be a great deal of knowledge around RTI. So it's actually very concerning, and we're hoping now, I think with the RTI Commission, which is due to be finally appointed in the very short term now, we know that the Constitutional Council have put forward names. We're hoping that things will move forward rather quickly from now on.
All right. Asoka, TI Sri Lanka has also advocated for something called the Open Government Partnership. Can you explain to our viewers watching us this morning, what is this concept?
Yeah, so the Open Government Partnership is fundamentally about having a plan. Now the thing is that we had the 100-day program last year. And the one thing that the 100-day program did was that the 100-day program for the first time said, we will have a new electoral law by this particular date. So maybe 3rd of March 2015 we'll have new election laws. Now, when we didn't get new election laws, for the first time we were able to say, hang on, by this day we were supposed to have this, so why don't we have it? So there's this new sense of accountability. Now, stemming from that, the government became a signatory to something called the Open Government Partnership late last year. And this is something that people like us at Transparency International Sri Lanka had always been aware of. And the main thing that the Open Government Partnership does is it basically takes the 100-day program thinking, but for 2 years. So for the next 2 years, the government will say what they will do and the dates by which they will do it. But now fundamental within this is that firstly the government has signed up to this. So there are around 70 different countries that have signed up to this, and they all create these 2-year national action plans saying what they will do and by what date. And our government has a deadline of the end of October to actually get this finished, finalized. But right at the core of the Open Government Partnership is the need to also consult civil society in developing these milestones and these deadlines. So now, for instance, so what we did at Transparency International was we were the conveners of civil society on this particular issue, and different organizations came together, and finally we have created a draft national action plan for the government of 12 issues, ranging from, let's say, education and women's representation and things on one side, ranging to, and health, let's say, ranging to issues of RTI implementation and corruption on another side. So we've given this to government now, and what we're telling government is, right, here is what we say, and here are the milestones that we have. You can approve this, or if you're not going to take it, give us reasons for why you're not taking this in.
So at which stage is this now?
So now this has been handed over. So the 12 commitments, 12 detailed commitments with like detailed milestones and dates have been handed over, and the government must approve. They have an international obligation to approve it before the end of October, but we're hoping that it'll be sooner than that.
All right. Also, Asoka, one of the commitments of the 12 commitments that you mentioned is corruption.
Yeah.
To strengthen the anti-corruption framework, to increase constructive public participation.
Yeah.
Now, especially after the new government came into power, we saw that bodies such as the CIABOC, the Bribery Commission, coming into activation, very much being involved in several high-profile issues as well. Do you see this as promising, or do you think that there needs to be more involvement from government players, for example, the police, the AG's department? Don't you think they have a greater role to play in ensuring justice?
So I think what we saw after the 19th Amendment with the sort of sort of reconstituting these independent commissions, that was a significant step. I think the one thing that I would add, which many people sometimes forget, is that also with the 19th Amendment, CIABOC was also given the power to investigate of their own motion. So no longer did there need to be a complaint, no longer did there have to be an outside driver, a complainant, for CIABOC to investigate something. CIABOC can do that on their own. Now, one thing that we also have to remember with that is that in having this right to investigate of their own motion, we also need to identify the fact that we also need to hold CIABOC to greater account. Because now if someone isn't investigated, we have to ask the CIABOC commissioners why they haven't gone about investigating. So I mean, with this greater independence is also a greater level of public accountability. I think the one thing is that there are fundamental questions that need to be addressed, and you touched on, let's say, the police. All of the investigating officers in CIABOC are from the police, and one question to answer is, does CIABOC need its own investigating arm, or should it be relying on the people who are sent by the police? And when they're being sent by the police, are the best officers sent by the police? Possibly, possibly not. Similarly, the skills required for investigation are quite specialized. So one example that was mentioned to me recently is that if someone's looking into the leasing of aircraft, now this is not a real example, but this just shows the technicalities of it. The leasing of aircraft, it's such a technical area, and all these contractual documents and everything else, are our investigators tooled up to really do the sorts of forensic audits and everything else required in looking at a aircraft tendering process, or contracting or leasing process? It's challenging. So I mean, I would say that the structure needs to be rethought. You also mentioned this matter of a public engagement. One particular area which I would touch on when it comes to public engagement is this idea of asset declarations of elected officials. Now, one thing which forms a part of the milestones of this anti-corruption commitment in the Open Government Partnership is the fact that we should repeal some of the secrecy provisions in our Declaration of Assets and Liabilities Act. In a nutshell, what that means is this, Sonali. You have the right to request asset declarations of any elected official. I have the right to those asset declarations. But if I show you what I request, or you show me what you request, we are liable to a 2,000 rupee fine and/or 2 years of rigorous imprisonment. So I mean, these are really archaic secrecy provisions which have absolutely no, I mean, in this whole sort of good governance space, they've got no relevance whatsoever. So within this is the repeal of the secrecy provisions of these, so that all people can look at asset declarations. And I'll tell you this, I've looked at asset declarations, filled out ones, and it's amazingly empowering how it feels when you actually read some of these documents. Because you start understanding, I mean, if someone's son is driving around in a Porsche, and yet you're looking at the asset declaration, and it says that there's 10 purchases of land somewhere, and that's all that they're recording for themselves and their dependents, you start making certain connections and having an insight into things that you didn't have before.
Sure. So, Asoka, the whole point of this is empowering the citizens of Sri Lanka. Is that what you're saying?
The idea is to ensure on two sides. One side is to ensure that we can strengthen the investigation arms of the state. And so there are also procedural things. So I know that there are real issues, because Siabok functions under 3 pieces of legislation. They've got the Siabok Act, but then for offences you have the Bribery Act and you have the Declaration of Assets and Liabilities Act. Now within the Declaration of Assets and Liabilities Act there are also massive constraints regarding the time in which Siabok has to investigate, things like that. So it's also about updating the Act, the legislation, to reflect the realities that currently exist. But also it's about empowering the public and giving greater accountability of, let's say, elected officials and senior civil servants to the public. And this is invariably, this is where things are moving anyway. Even with the RTI Act, this is about empowering the public. The only thing is, empowering the public can also be difficult. And maybe I'll give an example and from RTI on how it's difficult. If I had to tell you that a citizen is empowered by the RTI Act, I would tell you something, I would say something like this. I would say, you have a legitimate expectation for your child to get into a particular government school. Under the RTI Act, you go and ask why your child didn't get into that school. Now that's how I would sell it. But it's actually not that easy, because this is all about, let's say, requesting information. So you need to know what information to request. So let's just say, for instance, on the school example, you need to be able to request information about the catchment area of that school and the cutoff mark of that school. And then what you do is you get the answers together, and then you have to tie the answers together to answer your bigger question of why your child didn't get into the school. So it's quite difficult and it's quite complicated to function. So organizations like our own need to assist citizens in, let's say, filing requests or understanding how these different open government systems work. But the government also needs to take some responsibility in telling people about it. Have we seen any government activity in really trying to disseminate what RTI is to people and how it will benefit citizens? Not really. So I mean, really, government needs to push ahead with these things.
So why, in your opinion, why do you suppose the government isn't playing a greater role in creating this awareness, not just about RTI, but about other matters as well?
I mean, let's face it, I mean, this current government when it comes to its sort of its public engagement and its communications, there seems to be a bit of a failure. And sometimes we hear dual voices coming from different areas as well. So I mean, that responsibility really needs to be taken. And I mean, this is not only symptomatic of RTI, but it's across the board. The communications and the engagement really need to improve.
All right, we are in conversation with the Executive Director of Transparency International. I believe we can go in for a short commercial break and we'll be right back.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
Good morning and welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is a Newsline. We're in conversation with the Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka, Asoka Obesekara. Asoka, I think after the new government came into power, there was a lot of hype about electoral reforms. However, it didn't really happen. So, where is it heading now?
Well, I think in the 100-day program, one of the key things that the President mentioned was that he will change the electoral system.
Yeah.
The main driving force for wanting to change the electoral system was the fact that there is a belief that going back to a constituency system where you have one MP for each electorate is a positive thing, but also to somehow keep this idea of PR. So we have this proportional representation system at the moment, and there is also a sense that this proportional representation system that we have is also ensures fairness. Because when we look back at our old elections from the 70s, we can see how there have been some occasions where one party has all of the seats in parliament and the second party has very few, even though their share in the vote changes is very small. So things have moved forward. I think the one encouraging thing is that the discussion around electoral reform has become a little bit more honest. When I say honest, we are actually looking at understanding how electoral systems function. If you remember, there was this big debate around the 20th Amendment before the parliamentary elections last year. Now that had a massive flaw, because that system was a bespoke system that was being created purely to suit political interests of that particular time. Now the discussions have moved forward, and now there's something called a mixed member proportional system. Now I promised you I wouldn't get overly technical
early in the morning,
but in a nutshell, what it means is this. If you have a ballot paper, what it means is that on the left-hand side of the ballot paper, you can vote for the person that you want to be your constituency MP. So you can vote for the individual there. And on the right-hand side of the ballot paper, you can vote for the party. So what that means is that, let's say if you're, for lack of better example, a JVP supporter, but you know that in your constituency, the JVP candidate can never win there, you may vote for a second candidate who you feel has a better chance of winning. So you may vote for the SLFP candidate in your electorate, but you can vote for the JVP as your party.
Yeah.
And so that's how the entire system will work. And based on what we're hearing, that is this mixed member proportional system with this dual vote is looking likely as a potential output from in our electoral reform discussions. But we have to see what happens there. But that is the only system that will ensure fairness through proportionality and constituency representation. But I'll add one thing, sorry. Many of the things which we are being told will be solved through electoral reform, I think are being missold. So for instance, the fact that violence will reduce because we're going to this new system and there's less intra-party violence, that is being missold, because actually what was intra-party violence between people in the same party before will now become inter-party violence
as opposed to intra-party.
Exactly. So I mean, this is a law and order issue that doesn't get solved through electoral reform. Similarly, let's say something like how much it costs to campaign. Now we hear that, let's say in the Colombo district, it cost at least 40 million rupees, let's say, to contest last election. Why should we think that just because we're going to a smaller area that the campaign costs will reduce? Because now you need to win your electorate, and if you're already in a culture of spending so much money to win an election, who's to say that you won't continue doing so and continue vote buying? So we need campaign finance reforms as well. Discussing electoral reform on its own doesn't solve the problems that we think it will.
Right. I was also going through the National Action Plan on the Open Government Partnership that we just discussed. One of the themes is also women in political governance, which is at an abysmal level. Asoka, how do you propose to reform this process? I mean, it's not easy. There's always the glass ceiling concept. It's not the easiest thing to do.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think it's women's political representation is a big issue. And whilst we like to continuously remind people that, you know, we had the first female prime minister and other things, when we look in parliament now, we have less than 5% of parliament are women.
Yeah.
And the big issue there is that it's not that we're just a laggard in South Asia. Globally, we are a laggard on this particular front. So this requires significant thinking. At the local government level, there is a 20% quota for women at the next local government election. So 20% of all local government politicians after the next election will at least be at least 20% will be women. But the issue is this: to do that, what we have done is something a little cheeky, because what we've done is we have expanded the size of every local government authority by 25% to accommodate this sort of women's quota. So so I mean, there's a big issue there. I mean, as you'd remember better than I even, I mean, no one was happy about this idea of having more politicians. But that's what we've done to protect and to improve women's representation at the local government level. There isn't much discussion around that at the parliamentary level at the moment, but that's an important thing to discuss going forward. And there are a few different ways in which women's representation can be secured.
All right. Thanks, Asoka. We're going for another short commercial break, and we'll be right back.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat. Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat.
Welcome back to Newsline. We're in conversation with Asoka Bisekara, the Executive Director of Transparency International. Asoka, going forward, in your capacity as the Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka, how do you suppose Sri Lanka should proceed on?
Proceed in which sense, Sonali?
It's a loaded question, but I'll let you choose. As in,
Sure.
Transparency International Sri Lanka has dealt with several issues, as I said, RTI, then asset declaration, and also the concept of open government partnership. So, with respect to these aspects, what do you think is missing? Is it the fact that Sri Lankans in general are not aware of their rights, or should more be done to create this awareness? What needs to be done?
Well, I think firstly, it's as you're touching on, awareness needs to be raised on many of these different issues. These things are not really relevant if citizens don't feel like it actually betters their lives. And we have really there's been no way in which the government has meaningfully engaged thus far to show that people's lives can change through these different things.
Sure.
I think on the right to information, it may be slightly premature, because still there are a few different things that need to be ironed out about how the RTI Commission will function, how information officers will function, all of these things. But the time is getting quite tight now. Government really needs to start acting from now onwards to to ensure that people know how the right to information can function for them. On these issues of open government and other things, the government is, it's ticking boxes. The fact that it has become a signatory to the Open Government Partnership is quite a big deal.
Sure.
The fact that a Right to Information Act has been passed after after being spoken about for over 20 years, it is quite a big deal. But the issue is this: once you actually pass legislation, you start realizing that it's only, legislation is almost like nothing. It's all in the implementation, and that's where citizens really get engaged, through implementation. So this government now has to prove that it has the capacity to implement. People do feel that it has this sort of legislative capacity in dealing with lots of these sort of complex legal matters and things like that. But how it interacts with citizens is going to be the key issue, and there's a big challenge there. On the asset declarations, I think that if members of parliament start being more open about the assets that they hold, that could really lead to a big shift in political culture. Because actually behind all of these different things that we've seen is the striving for people. People are calling for a new political culture. People are angry with the current political culture that prevails. Asset declarations are a way in which, if let's say a handful of MPs come out and unilaterally disclose their assets, it can go two ways. Sometimes the way in which the media may cover that could be that those few MPs, people go into all the nitty-gritty of their asset declarations and they're not used as the example for other MPs to follow. But there are opportunities on things like asset declarations to really start shifting this political culture, which everyone really is striving to really change,
All right, and on that note, I think we can wrap up this edition of A Newsline. Thank you so much, Asoka, for joining us.
With pleasure.
We'll see you again, same place, same time tomorrow. Good day.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.